Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Recently, Watkins Press started publishing a series of slim volumes that explore the biographies of famous people in the past. The first three books released explored John F. Kennedy, Casanova, and Oscar Wilde. Three more volumes come out next week: bios of Galileo, the Buddha, and Charles Dickens. Each book starts with a short introduction by someone very famous. Simon Callow introduced the Oscar Wilde book, for example, and Peter Ackroyd provides the introduction to the volume about Charles Dickens. Following a bit of traditional, straightforward biography by a major scholar in the field or other knowledgeable author, the books turn to a highly readable but rather unusual style, an invented interview between scholar and famous person. In the case of the book I read, Conversations with Dickens, Paul Schlicke lists out a series of general topics and his related questions, fictively answered by Charles Dickens himself. Of course, Schlicke comes up with both the questions and the answers based on his knowledge of Dickens' life experiences, his personality and attitudes, and his authorial voice. The slim volume does provide a clear summary of some of the most salient points of Dickens' biography. In addition to recapitulating the major events of his childhood and adulthood, Schlicke also lays out the major themes of Dickens' work. In the scholar's words, a romantic fascination with childhood, the Victorian aspiration to succeed through personal effort, a delight in literary associations, and the ability to transform a mundane moment into a dramatically compelling and deeply revealing episode. I really enjoyed this brief biography and learned several pieces of information I didn't know. One piece of biography that I didn't remember was that several of Dickens' children were named after famous authors of the time, a fact I find utterly charming. One was Henry Fielding Dickens, another was Alfred Tennyson Dickens, etc. I also loved the short discussion of the ways in which Shakespeare's King Lear influenced both the Old Curiosity Shop and Dombey and Son. Another discussion in the book shows how many characters share initials or similar sounding names with Dickens himself. For example, David Copperfield has Dickens' own initials transposed. In this biography's fictive conversations, Dickens lists many other examples, including one where he says he may have gone a bit far in naming one character Richard Doubledick. Still, I have three significant reservations about this book. Sometimes the conceit of a fictive conversation seems overly contrived. Take this dialogue. "Hello, I'm sorry, I thought I was alone." "And hello to you, my good sir, hello to you. How do you do? A stranger in these parts, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes, I've been tramping in the Kentish countryside all day. When it started to rain, I was more than ready to find somewhere to stop to get warm. And then I came upon this comfortable-looking inn. The Leather Bottle, is it?" "My local hostelry. I live only a few miles away, and of course it was the first stop for Mr. Pickwick and his companions when they set out on their famous adventures all those years ago." "Shades of Jacob Marley, Mr. Charles Dickens. I thought you'd been dead these 7 weeks, but you taught us in the Christmas Carol that spirits can do anything they like. So I'm as certain as I'm sitting here that it's really you and no humbug. Can I offer you a pint of porter?" When I reached the end of the setup, I couldn't quite decide if I was charmed or if it was just a little too silly to make for a worthwhile read. Another problem I had with this unique style was that it was unclear what was basically the words of Dickens versus what was interpretation by Schlicke. Yes, there are a few footnotes at the end of the volume, but not to explain the rationale or the sources that Schlicke used to create his text for Dickens. Too many times I found myself unsure whether to believe in this fictional Dickens. To take one of the examples above, did Dickens actually say that 2 of his novels were clearly linked to Shakespeare's King Lear? Or was Schlicke using the fact that Dickens was involved in Shakespearean groups as evidence to support his reasonable assumption? I haven't read either of these 2 novels yet, and perhaps Dickens writes his literary indebtedness directly in the books. If you know the answer to that, please speak up in the comments. Finally, this biography is very slim, containing only a very sketchy portrait of the great writer. While the conceit of a conversation between scholar and great author does make for a breezy and compelling read, it often feels like padding. What could have been easily condensed into roughly a Wikipedia article gets told in story form and covers more than 100 pages. Although I say that as a critique, it definitely feels strangely appropriate when talking about Charles Dickens, master of the story-filled, massive Victorian tome. Thanks for joining me today. See you next time on Hannah's Books.